Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art and culture. And for another unscripted movie review, this time we're going to be talking about the directorial debut of Kay Cannon, the teenage sex comedy, Blockers. You know, the more I think about it, the whole idea of the subgenre in comedy, the teenage sex comedy, that's a little weird, a little uncomfortable when you think about it, right? I mean, it didn't used to be culturally. Back in the 1980s, 1990s, these films, when pioneered by artists like John Hughes and directors in that vein, they sought to speak to teenagers, speak in their language, elevate some of the raunchiness, play up some of that focus on sex, because really, that's what a lot of teenagers focus on. Not a bad thing either. And these movies are often tremendously successful. But at the same time, if you go back to some of the movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High or American Pie or even Superbad, a movie I saw in that whole era and I still stick up for to this day, there's more going on that Judd Apatow intended, and that film has held up pretty well, but there's a lot of uncomfortable elements in terms of what those movies were saying surrounding sexual politics that might be kind of questionable when marketed towards teenagers. Just saying on that front, like there were some movies that were ahead of their time and I will give them credit for that, but not nearly enough of them. And again, there are some unsettling implications, especially given that the market that they were presented for. And now even that sounds puritanical. So maybe it would take sense for a movie like this to come out. Blockers, which is explicitly focusing on three girls in high school. They're planning on losing their virginity at prom. And the parents, who are not quite as close as the daughters are, Ike Barinholtz, John Cena, and Leslie Mann, they discover about this teenage sex pact, and they make a point of looking to stop it at any means possible, albeit for very different reasons. John Cena is your overachieving father figure who desperately wants his girl to be safe and really plays up the overprotective side, even as he's kind of struggling with the fact that it's not really what he wants to do. Then you have the next piece that comes up with Leslie Mann. Her daughter is going off to college far away, and she's, as a divorcee herself, she's realizing that her own struggles there, that she might lose some of that closeness she's had with her daughter as she's growing up. And finally, you have Ike Barinholtz, who's playing the divorcee father figure, who sees his girl in a very complicated situation with how her virginity might end up getting lost, and he tries to insert herself into the conversation because he wants her to make the right choice. Although it seems a little bit more incoherent when you think about some of the mechanics behind what he wants there. Yeah, this movie, I get its intentions. I think it's been marketed in a very different way. It's marketed as a fair bit more zany and live wire than it kind of is. And part of that whole issue is that the parent side of things is often played up to cartoonish extremes in terms of a lot of the stuff you would typically see the kids be getting on. And the choice to do that kind of splits the narrative, and it kind of leaves the kids getting increasingly all the more exasperated as their parties keep getting busted and they keep having to fight off their increasingly obnoxious parents in the whole situation. But the thing is the framing presents this as the parents aren't really right in this conversation. And that's one thing I will appreciate about some elements of deftness in the script. Now, the script is coming for us. It's in the same vein as Kay Cannon's other movies, which are the Pitch Perfect series, and that there's inner bits of dialogue that are clearly a little overwritten and smarter than most people would give it credit, but the larger mechanics of how they all come together is a little bit more clumsy. And I think there are definitely elements in that whole side of things that makes this film kind of weaker than it should be. But I will give it points coming from the Pitch Perfect mindset of being a little bit more progressive than you would otherwise see. For instance, you'll take Leslie Mann's character, where she has to come to the realization that despite her own hangups and mistakes coming with her daughter, and her daughter potentially losing her virginity and moving away, that's natural. It's not painted as something that she would otherwise is in the right trying to stop. Similar thing for a lot of stuff coming with John Cena's character to his daughter, and very much of he's trying to be as much as he can that good father figure, but at the same time he also is very much acutely aware that his daughter is just as much of a presence in her own life, and she doesn't need him running in trying to save her, especially given his brand of parenting, even if it might feel natural for his guy in that figure, because he is, again, is John Cena. Look how he's built there. And incidentally, John Cena proves once again that he is a great comedic presence. Like in the Channing Tatum sort of way, way where he's ripped as hell, but at the same time, he's got that natural expressiveness that makes him great in front of the camera here. Then there's like Barinholtz's character, where he's now come with the realization that he knows his daughter is gay, but still in the closet. And he doesn't want her to lose her virginity potentially to a guy, especially a guy that is nowhere close to being as good as he should be for her. And this is where I think the film kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too, because it wants the whole focus to be that she's got her own stuff together and she's coming to grips with her own sexuality in her own way, and mistakes will happen, but a lot more of it doesn't quite play to daddy's right in this situation, but it does play a little more heavy-handed in trying that her struggle in terms of her sexuality is now he takes it upon him to take some ownership of that. It feels awkward, a little bit weird in how that all comes together, especially with how her subplot kind of ends and feels a little abortive there, if I'm being honest. And that's the other thing with this movie. I think there is moments that they're trying to hit for extreme emotional notes, or at least more deep emotional notes that might have been pulled off better in a film like Love, Simon, but it's paced way too quickly for a lot of them to stick. A lot of the acting is played a lot more broad, a lot more manic in the style of those Pitch Perfect movies, and it doesn't really help when you're trying to do like Whiplash pivots into something that's a little bit more sentimental and driven in that sort of dark territory. And incidentally, this is a movie that does kind of skew away from some of the darkness that would come in the genre. It's not nearly as exploitative as I was potentially expecting, and it does play with more of that progressive edge. There isn't a lot of TNA on display, and I kind of respect the film for that. But at the same time, it also plays itself as, well, it doesn't quite let off the handle as some of the great teen sex comedies have done. There isn't quite those same memorable scenes outside of one particularly amusing scene at a lake house. But beyond that, I found myself wishing for a greater emotional through line. I found a lot of the characters, as broad as they are painted, for them to try and go for those more subtle, nuanced emotional pivots, I don't quite think it sticks to the landing, even when you do get the heart-to-heart conversations that come in the third act. And you also have to realize that a lot of this movie is driven off of the split off between the characters, because it's more the adult characters who have the more pronounced comedic role in this movie, with the daughters kind of having to act off of them. And, well, the girls do a phenomenal job, specifically John Cena's daughter in particular. She's got a lot of real stage presence and charisma. And her comic timing is fantastic. But when the adults become more of the characters in this story, subtextually, it still becomes a lot of their arcs, not the girls in the same way. And that lack of balance, I kind of think hurts the overall overarching themes of the narrative and story. Because again, if it's supposed to be about them coming into their own when it comes to growing up and their sexual awakening, shouldn't more of the focus in the aesthetic be on them and not the parents trying desperately to stop them? Because the parental arcs of them learning to let their kids go in their own ways, I don't know, I think it was just the acting was a little bit too broad to sell it well for me. Even if a lot of the dialogue is really sharp, and even if I think the broad notes of it do click into place, I think just a lot of the architecture of the film feels a tad clumsy. That said, there are a couple pretty good gags. A lot of the subtlety comes in the dialogue, which I definitely appreciate. Some of the broader gags don't quite click as well, but it is funny enough. I will appreciate that. I won't say it's a particularly sharp film, but at the same time, there are also some sillier jokes that I don't think click as well. Some sight gags I think that are a little too goofy. And honestly, I think if this film had a little bit more breathing room and didn't quite feel at the breakneck pace it has, it could have actually been able to pay off some of those more emotional moments effectively. A little more subtlety in this film could have definitely done it a lot of favors. You can tell this is Kate Cannon's directorial debut, and while she maneuvers the camera pretty well, while she pulls off some pretty inspired shots, it can still feel a little shaggy around the edges. It doesn't quite earn the breakneck pace it's trying to pull off. Not quite as stylized as you would otherwise hope for. But still, there isn't really a lot to say about a movie like this. It's middle brow, it's going for some good ideas, I appreciate that. Again, some good performances here too, but it's not one that's really going to stick with me outside of, again, a few decent moments of acting. And really, I wish the daughter's story arc had taken a little bit more precedent and they'd gotten a little bit more room to breathe. So for me, I don't know, strong 6 out of 10. If you're curious about it, it's worth a watch, but it's more of a matinee thing more than anything else. You wouldn't rush out to see it. And as much as I want to support the director for this, again, her directorial debut, I think there are still some edges that need to be rounded off a little bit more to make this a more streamlined product. It's good, check it out if you're curious, but I wouldn't say you're missing anything tremendous. Just saying. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. Not really a lot to say about this one. I'm actually surprised this review ran as long as it did, but hey, is the sort of movie I think will have its specified audience, even though I do think some teenagers might be a little faintly embarrassed by the whole proceedings. It's definitely got its cringier side. But hey, if you want to take a look at the movie, go ahead and take a look. I got the poll up there for all you guys to tell me. Actually, I don't know where people are going to fall on this. A lot of critics seem to like it. I'm just a little bit cooler on the whole momentum of the film as a whole. Beyond that, if you guys want to get involved in supporting this channel or potentially help impact my schedule, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, currently going on right now, you guys get to add albums, movies, even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. But until next time, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.